Hi everyone and welcome to Coin Talk. I'm Campbell and today I'm very excited to have two fantastic speakers with us from the British Museum's Department of Money and Medals who will be presenting on documenting and digitising numismatic collections. So first we have Miriam Dafydd, Curator of Digitisation. Miriam specialises in managing large-scale cataloguing projects and finding new ways to engage audiences with digitised collections. Before joining the British Museum, she led the curatorial arm of the Science Museum Group's One Collection project. Joining her is Michael Laposata, a documentation assistant working on documenting and digitising the Money and Medals collection. Mike brings a wealth of experience in auditing, cataloguing, and imaging numismatic collections from the Byzantine Empire all the way through to the contemporary Brazilian medals. Now, as usual with these talks, if you have any questions, please pop them in the chat and I will go through them with Miriam and Mike at the end of the talk. If for some reason the chat isn't working for you, you can email your questions in to mmn@warwick.ac.uk. I will post the email in the chat and I will be keeping an eye on the inbox, so please don't hesitate to send your questions in there either. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Miriam and Mike.
Thank you, Campbell. That's a lovely introduction. As you mentioned, I'm curator for digitisation, and I don't have a numismatic background, as mentioned there. So just to say, as a preface for this, you do not have to be an expert in coins necessarily to start cataloguing coins. However, Mike, as mentioned, has a little bit more of a background in numismatics. Mike, would you like to introduce yourself a bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. Just wanted to say hello and welcome all to our talk here, and thanks for joining us. Yes, as mentioned, I have a bit of a numismatic background. My background academically is in economic history, and I've worked at a couple of other museums outside of the BM dealing with numismatic collections. So certainly wouldn't say that I'm a numismatist by any stretch of the definition there, but I do have some experience working with numismatic collections, and so as you can see, though, you do not need to be an expert, as we'll get into it. It is really something that you can learn easily while you're going along.
Thanks, Mike. So I've chosen a few objects here just to demonstrate the breadth in the collection that we're working with here at the British Museum. So it isn't just coins, it's banknotes, dies, badges as well, and even some stickers, that kind of thing, tokens too from the 18th and 19th centuries, and even Tesco tokens, so can be very contemporary too. So I'm going to give a bit of an overview of the project that we're working on specifically, which, is for a national institution, so at some scale, but hopefully some of the things that we walk through today will be, scalable down or even up, or in other ways for projects you might be working on. So there might be some useful tips in there, and we're always happy to discuss in more detail some of the things brought up too. So just to give a bit of background of the project we're working on. You will likely not have been surprised to hear that the British Museum didn't have a digital record for all its objects. Few museums do, it's a common issue in the sector. But at the end of 2023, our interim director at the time announced a plan to document and digitise the entire collection. It started in 2024. And will be running until 2029. Many will know that it's difficult to secure funding for documentation projects. It's not glamorous, it's not sexy, it's not exhibitions, but it is the bedrock of what museums do, and it's good to know what we have. And we've been the fortunate recipients of a substantial grant from the Headley Trust to enable this work. There's a little bit more information. There was an update recently on the website, so that little screen grab there, you can go and use the tiny URL link to access that. But just to say, as with many museums, this work has been ongoing since we had digital databases some 40 years ago. So we've been adding to it, and curators have been working hard over the years, but hopefully this project will bring us over the finish line. So here's a little bit of context for the department specifically. So We knew how many records we had on the database. We could search for that. So we had about 642,000 back when I started. But we also knew, thanks to an audit that we conducted in 2021, that there were far more objects than this physically in the department, to the tune of about 141,000. So that was a good start and an estimate of where we'd be working towards. It's hit and miss how correct the audit is, but it is a good guide, and we can see in the collection whether there are gaps in cataloguing pretty quickly. We also could see that quite a lot fewer of our objects had an image online, and an image is super helpful because we can always enhance the documenting from it as well. So we have about 500,000 objects to get an image for. So it's quite a lot of work, and it's quite a big collection, bigger than some museums entirely in some cases. So we are working through and prioritising at pace. But Mike and I are not doing this on our own. We have a system and we have some colleagues too. So this is a simplified representation of the process and setup that we have here. So we have 6 documentation assistants. That is a lot. We are quite resource rich here at the moment. So they are working by cabinet. As you can see behind me, coins are stored in cabinets with other coins, typically from similar areas and eras. They contain some information about the coins too, so maybe a ticket saying the denomination or the mint that they're from. So we have a head start there in terms of identifying our collections. You might have coins in a bag or an ice cream tub or on the shelf with a lot less contextual information, but we'll address some of the things that you can do to address that later on. This is very helpful, of course, for us, but I think some of the tips later on will still be helpful. For the majority of cases, we're using spreadsheets, as Mike will go into more detail later, to create new records, but we might also input directly into our CMS, MI+, the Collections Management Database, for smaller amounts of objects. And our 6 documentation assistants work to a target of about 30 objects per day. Depending on what we're working on, some things are trickier than others. So this is an average. We'll be able to do less some days and much more on others. The second step, that's quite specific to us. We have quite a clunky system here sometimes, but it simply involves preparing spreadsheets with the registration numbers or object numbers for objects in the order that objects are in the trays in the cabinets. It's a bit convoluted. This makes it easier for imaging assistants in step 3 to image each object in turn, process the images in batches, which Mike will explain in more detail, and then upload them to our asset management software. We've got a sort of a packet one. Other museums will have different setups. They might even combine the CMS and the digital asset management software. After this step, our objects appear on our Collections Online website with our records and images together. But I'll let Mike tell you a little bit more of the detail. So if you want to take control of the slides, Mike.
All right, I think I got control now. So let's move into the specifics of each of these steps here. I'll go ahead and begin with our documentation standards. So let's remember, importantly, why are we here? Why are we doing documentation? It's really to get the most important essence of an object down into a record so that we can determine each record or each object, from one another. To that end, the British Museum follows the Collections Trust Spectrum standards that really create a bunch of different key fields that we need to fill out as we're going through the documentation process. These are, in particular, a unique object number, an object name, and the number of objects that you're dealing with each record, an object description or photo, the location of the object, who owns the object, when this record was itself created or edited, and as well as maybe a provenance ownership as well. Where did this come from before we had it in our collection? We've also worked with our in-house documentation team as well as the curators here at the Numismatics or the Department of Money and Metals to come up with some other fields that might be useful for numismatic collections in particular. Again, this is helping us determine or differentiate objects from each other using simply a digital record. So we've included things like hazards or measurements, the materials that are used, a type series or denomination, even production details like when and where and who is minting this. All of these are really important aspects, not only for the historical information about an object, but to differentiate objects from one another. So to go into some of those very basic fields, we'll begin with an object number. And as you can see here, this little kind of chart or graph we have on the right, this is how we come to our registration or object numbering system. As you can see, because we have a really old collection, a very historic collection, curators in the 1840s might have done things a little differently than how we're doing them today. And so it's a very complex registration number system that we've come up with here at the British Museum. We're having to work through all of those historic problems. You might not have to deal with that, but it is crucial that each object has its own unique object number so that they can be differentiated from one another. A description as well can be as simple as something like silver coin. That's what we do a lot of the time when we're just making a straight basic record for something. It can also obviously be added to. You could do physical descriptions for the obverse and reverse. That's something our volunteer teams do a lot when they're enhancing records. And so it's important to make sure that you have something there that at least differentiates one object from another. Location as well, as you can see, all of these beautiful cabinets behind me. It's really crucial that you update a location, not only what cabinet it's in, but what tray it's in as well. Running the study room, sometimes I can tell you that this is something that moves around a lot as you're moving around objects in your collection. It's important to update this each and every time, and that's something that we have to do a whole lot of. A lot of our problems are about finding objects that might exist somewhere on the database. We just don't know where because nobody updated the location, and so it can be a little difficult to piece it all together. Dimensions as well. Sometimes you'll have a coin that looks exactly the same as another one. It just might be a couple of grams difference off in terms of the weight. Again, that's really important to make that determination between two objects. The material as well, and then the previous ownership history, which you can determine well, at least we determine based on our object tickets or our archival registry. I'm sure you all have something very similar that you can work with there. In terms of the added extras, what are some of the specific numismatic fields that we use to enhance our object records? The first and foremost is around production details. So this is basically the who, what, where, when, how, and why of a coin, of an object here. So who is doing the minting? That could be the moneyer or the issuing authority. Where is this being done? What's the mint location, for instance, or where is it being issued? How? So what is the process? Is this a cast metal? Is this something that's being milled in a big machine? Is it being hammered, struck? These are all important kind of historical and numismatic details in a coin. From there, we can go into some even nittier grittier details, such as the type series or the denomination of a coin. Oftentimes, this is put together and compiled using our reference catalogs or so on and so forth. Again, it just is helping add more information. The more information we can add to an object record, obviously, the better. Serial numbers, again, are going to be super important for our banknote collection in particular. Those are all going to be unique. So again, helping to make a differentiation between each object. Inscriptions, we don't always get to, at least on our side of it, but this is, again, something that you can add. Each inscription might even be a little different, even though you're dealing with the same kind of type of coin. You saw that a lot with, or I saw it a lot when dealing with the Anglo-Saxon coinage collection. Might be a similar mint and a similar moneyer, but they've just spelled their name slightly differently each time. Again, that's going to help you determine a difference between the couple of different objects that you're dealing with. And then finally, references. If you can say, hey, this is a type reference or something like that, it's going to make it easier for future students or researchers to come along to your object record and say, hey, this is actually really interesting. Let me do some more reading about this, and they can go directly where you want them to. So let's look at a basic record and then a more enhanced record coming out of our collection. You can kind of see the difference between those two sorts of things. So we're looking first here at a very basic record coming from our collections database MI+. And as you can see, we've got all of the basics down here for the most part. We'll get there in a second, but we've got the registration number, which you can see highlighted there. We also have the object owner, which is us. It is in the Department of Money and Metals, which you can see at the top. It has a location and date. Down there and about the middle of the screen, CNM in February of 2025. You also have an object description. Again, it can be as simple as a cast lead medallion or a medal. But then also you have this sort of further description, bust of unknown. Hazard information, we now have an additional hazards field, but we can see here that they've added in the material that this is lead. This is going to warn anyone coming in contact with this object that, hey, maybe use some extra precautions because this is lead. Now, I used to be a teacher, so I'm going to ask everybody to kind of type in the chat here a little bit, interact with us here. What are we missing here? What would you want for just a very basic record? What would you like to see added to this record here? Because this is certainly not a perfect one, even by the very basics. Go ahead and pop it in the chat if there's anything you see that you think could be added on. I'll give you all just a few seconds here. What should be added, do you think? Measurements, absolutely, Catherine. Yes, we're going to want the weight or the diameter, or preferably both would be excellent. To have that in there. Again, we're trying to make a differentiation between different objects. If we're dealing with two lead metals, right, the only way we're going to be able to determine a difference is by their weight. Date of record creation actually probably would be at the very bottom. I just haven't included it here, but definitely good to know, Jessica. Provenance, Marcus, would be good. As you can see down in that previous ownership tab, there's nothing there. So yeah, these are all kind of things that you'd want for a very basic record. A photo would also obviously be good. But when we're going to the enhanced record, you can see that we've added a whole lot more information. So this here is an object record that I worked on. This is for a Cypriot coin, which I did my undergraduate dissertation on. So I kind of geeked out on this particular record and added a little bit more than I should have. But as you can see, we've added a whole lot more. Not only have we added the mass and the diameter, I've added inscriptions. I've given the date that it was produced, the mint and the issuing authority. I've added in the provenance information and some reference information as well. And as you can see in the top left here, there's an image. Now, this was an already existing image. We haven't gone through and done this as a part of our new processes here, but just something to keep in mind, right? That this is a little more so when you're looking for an enhanced record, what we're meaning here. Again, there's very little chance that someone is going to come across this record and not be able to identify the coin laying in front of them based on it. And that's really what we're here to do. Now, what resources? How are we creating this record in the first place? So the first and foremost thing that I'll talk about is an object ticket. So here at the British Museum, underneath every single coin, we have an object ticket that has its object number, maybe the provenance details, and maybe as well some information about the object that we're dealing with there. These are lifesavers for us. Not only do they give us a direct object number that we can then go and deal with in our archival material, but it's also giving us some of the information that we're going to need to perform a correct ID of the coin. Your institution might do it a little bit differently, just to know that we have it pretty easy, that former curators have gone through and done a lot of the work for us, which is excellent.
I might add there, Mike.
Yes, please.
Just to interrupt, sorry, that sometimes we don't have the number. Sometimes we think it does need a number, and so we give it a supplementary number, knowing that it is part of the collection, but that it's been estranged from its ticket. And so given that we have this project in 5 years, we give it a temporary number for the time being. With all the details captured, we are accountable for it, we know where it is, we know how to find it, and then hopefully can reunite it with its true number. Maybe the ticket wasn't written for it, it's probably on a line in a register somewhere, just we haven't got the time to go digging for it, and it could have been acquired any point in the last 250 years. So we do also have workarounds for when it's not perfect. I'd add as well that I know a lot of museums might not have, well, won't have tickets with every object. Sometimes contextual information can be a good start. Is there a Roman coin stored next to bits of other Roman objects? There's the box in which it's stored, say, in loads of medieval coins in pen on the outside of it. These are sort of clues that I have had to deal with in different contexts that might indicate what you're looking at. Just be something of a start there.
Absolutely. As well, some other resources that we're using here. So we really just use basic measurement devices here. We use just a lab grade scale, nothing super crazy. We can buy it on Amazon, right? That takes us to the hundredths place, just similar to what you see here on the screen. We just use a basic ruler, no need for fancy calipers or anything like that. Really just anything that you can use to determine, you know, the super crucial measurements for an object. We're also using online resources in addition to what we have around us here in our vast library. Things like Ochre or Numista, even auction websites, and I find that even just sometimes doing a quick Google search instead of going to bother a curator, 9 times out of 10, I can find at least something on the internet that will generally lead me in the right direction. As with anything, right, Googling is a skill, and as you go through and work with numismatic collections, you'll start to learn, you know, how to search up an object online, you know, whether it's typing in the inscription a little bit to try and draw it from an auction catalog or something of the sort. You'll find that that is generally pretty helpful way, at least of trying to determine what it is you're looking at. That leads us, though, to some of our enhanced resources. What are sort of the next step of things that you can use to really make certain that you're making a correct ID? For us, that means first and foremost our archival materials. We're very lucky that we have acquisition registers that date back to the 1840s here at the British Museum, and we also have meeting minutes from our department that stretch back even further than that. So we have a wealth of information that we can utilize to help determine what an object is, who it came from, so on and so forth, as it entered our collection. This isn't always a perfect ID. They weren't making perfect coin IDs in the 1840s either, but it does at least generally lead you down, at least towards the correct path. We also are very lucky to have an extensive reference library here at the British Museum. So we have a number of catalogs like the RIC or the DOC, but we also have the British Museum catalog, which is a snapshot of what our collection looked like across a couple of different areas in the early 20th century. And so that gives us a lot of context for how our collection evolved over the last 100 years or so. But we can also rely on our expert curatorial advice, which is great. So we're capable of just walking down the hall and talking to an authority on numismatics. But with that said, this is all information that is available to you all as well. We're a public serving institution, and so while we definitely recommend you try to do the IDs on your own first, you are more than welcome to email coinsid@britishmuseum.org to chat with one of our curators and help make a coin ID. And I can also say that the Money and Metals Network has a number of excellent YouTube videos that launch into various different coinages, and even has a Numismatics 101 to help you walk through, okay, what are sort of the basics of doing a coin ID there. So I definitely recommend using those resources. And I will say as well that our collection is open for study. So if you ever find yourself in London, you can book a time to come to our study room and look at any of our books or any of our objects. Miriam, anything to add here? Great. Excellent. So the process. You've got all of the information. You've made a successful ID. How are you going to input it? We do it in 2 different ways. The first, as Miriam alluded to earlier, is working with our collections database. Now, this is great because you can create a record in real time. You can watch it get uploaded and all of that. The problem is you have to do it one at a time. And so when you're dealing with a large volume of objects like we are in our project, this can be a little tedious. It can be very easy to make silly mistakes. And as you can see here as well, the UI isn't particularly good. It looks like it, might have been created with Windows 95 in mind and instead of what we're dealing with today. So it's not always the easiest setup. Instead, what we generally do is we work on spreadsheets. We're very grateful to have a documentation team that takes our spreadsheets and can upload it directly to our database system for us. However, it's my understanding that this isn't a particularly difficult process, especially with some of the newer collections management softwares that are out there. So this might even be something that you can do yourself. But this is great for uploading large volumes of information, especially when you're dealing with a number of objects that are relatively of the same type. So I'm thinking about the wall that's in Miriam's office of Chinese coins that are, there's thousands of them and they all might be just slightly different. Maybe a mint is different, or maybe the year that it was minted was different. And so this is something that is very easy to do when you're copy and pasting a lot of very similar information. And again, it can get uploaded in due time. Finally, so that wraps up the sort of documentation side of things. Once that's documented, and Miriam said earlier, once everything gets sequenced properly, we can move on to our imaging team. So the imaging is pretty straightforward, and despite these images here, I have to say what we're doing here is not super fancy. It is not super high tech. We have a static photography setup with a camera that looks straight down onto an object, as you can see in our images here. It shines a light on it, and we take a picture of the ticket that comes with it so that we can properly identify the obverse and the reverse of each coin. And as you can see here, we occasionally have a backlit setup as well. Again, this is not anything super complicated. These cameras are not, at the most high end of anything that we could get. We have some resourcing, right? But it's not anything that can't be replicated relatively easily. Just a few notes again, that what we're doing is we're taking images from the top down and we're shooting light directly onto the object with a ring light. This is super important, we have found, to making sure we're getting a crisp, clean, detailed image of the coin. And again, that is the most important part of this, right? If we're making object records to differentiate between different objects in the collection, having a very strong and detailed image is super crucial to being able to determine what object is what. So just a note that we don't have only coins in our collection. We have a number of different types of objects. The two that kind of change the photography process most are first banknotes, which we do not image, we scan. As you can see in this middle photo here, we're just using a regular office scanner. Now we've kind of jerry-rigged a little weight system up there to make sure that the banknote is flat on the screen, but really this is not super complicated. We're just scanning, and we might process them a little bit different, but we'll get to that in a second. And then more three-dimensional objects like coin dies, where you not only need the obverse of the reverse of the die, but you want the sort of three-dimensionality aspect of it as well. Our imaging lead Alberto here in the far left image, as you can see, has sort of set up a light also off to the side to kind of really highlight those three-dimensional aspects of it, and has created a sort of light reflector as well, which she said is really easy to do. All you need is a piece of cardboard, you put some tin foil on one side, and then you wrap that in a piece of paper, and that's a rudimentary light reflector. So again, we're not doing anything extremely high tech here. We're just kind of working with it and seeing how it goes. But yeah, those are really the important aspects of our imaging process. From there, we have found, because we're dealing with such a large volume of objects in our collection, that image processing actually speeds up the process. You might find that this doesn't work for your institution and the number of objects that you're dealing with on a daily basis, but we found that it's been particularly helpful in the uploading stage, where we're putting our images onto our image sharing software. So as you can see here, step one is we have the image of the coin. Now you can see that even though we're doing this on just a blank white background, there's differences in the color, there's differences in the shadowing. It almost comes across as a little gray. We then use an automated process in Photoshop to eliminate this background and put it onto a stark white background that you can see in step 2. It cuts everything else out and just has a white background. We find that this really enhances the details that you can see on the coin, but again, so long as there's a solid background, it isn't super crucial. Then finally, we take the obverse image and the reverse image and we merge them together into one, again using an automated procedure. This creates only one image that needs to be put onto our image hosting platform. This saves us a lot of time and frankly a lot of space as well, which is super crucial when dealing with digital collections. Again, this is a step that we find is pretty useful, simply because we are dealing with large volumes of objects here. If you're only dealing with, maybe a couple of hundred objects, this might not be necessary for you. The only thing that I would point out is make sure that your whatever imaging you're doing is on a solid and relatively, white or gray background. This helps bring out the details in the coins. Sometimes you'll see in our Coins ID email, somebody will take a picture of a coin up against their like gingham tablecloth, and it gets really difficult to determine what's coin and what's not. Having it on a solid background makes things super useful. What I'll say again as well, we're using Photoshop. We're very lucky to have something like that where you can make these sort of automated processes, but there are free versions of Photoshop-like softwares online that you can use. I don't know about the automating in those, but you can definitely just do the sort of rudimentary cutting out of the object. And Miriam, I'll send it back to you.
Thanks, Mike. I will take control. Here we go. Just wait for that to come through. Lovely. Just to add to Mike's point on imaging there, so the images we're taking are reference shots, just simply for that documentation purpose. Images that you'll find, in posh exhibition catalogues or on displays around the museum. There's a central photography team that takes those on, sexy black backgrounds and things like that. So we are very much front and back so that we know what we're looking at and know what we're looking for as well. All right, so the project manager in me always wants to report on what we're doing. And I think it's important as well. It's a step sometimes people don't take when they're doing a piece of work, but it's a nice way of showing off about any achievements, no matter how small in scale they are. So when it comes to reporting, some of the fundamental things to think about are who are your stakeholders. So who do you want to share good news with, or bad news? Sometimes that is the case too. That could be the public. It could be your managers at work, certainly is for me. Funders, researchers as well. So anybody with a stake in what you're doing. Where might you share this information? So it could very simply be in meetings. It could even be a newsletter that you send out or that you might compile for your museum or the work that you're doing. All good ways of sharing, just, pitching it at different ways there. And what's your starting point as well? So before you start anything, the same as an earlier slide I had there with about 640,000 coins already done, it's good to have a sense of what sort of ground zero is. Where are you starting from so that you can, record that achievement against a starting point there? So I chose mine. That's when I started my job. And then from there, I can see the progress sort of being measured as I go along. Having 200 medals recorded already, but you've got 500 to do, that is a perfectly adequate starting point, something similar to that. Do you have a target? Have you got 500 medals, or is it just rolling improvements? I'd like to improve, 30% of the collection's records. I'd like to add a diameter or a weight to them across the next few years. It's sort of a target, but it's a little bit more open-ended. So what kind of things might you share? So the number of objects added to the database in a month. That's an example of one I record monthly. How many new images added to records each month? That's one I do as well. And also, those are very quantitative, but qualitative is important too. So stories, narrative, are there any unexpected finds, interesting objects that you've come across? We've certainly found them. Are there things that you can't really put in figures? We finished a whole wall of cabinets. Well, we might be able to draw the figures of that, but actually it's a lot more engageable to know that all of the Chinese cash coins are done, whereas, just saying 11,000 things doesn't quite translate the same. How might you do this? So I've got spreadsheets about spreadsheets. So I spreadsheet how many things are sent to me in spreadsheets, that kind of thing. I don't recommend that, but you can compare monthly figures on specific searches in your database. So you can search for how many medals there are in your database. Has it gone up? Has it gone down? Hopefully it shouldn't. Keep track in a reporting spreadsheet what you're doing. So just have an Excel open, make a note of these things. They're easy to forget, but they're nice to be able to draw on. You can even use graphs to demonstrate growth over a period of time. Certainly if you're working on a specific project with an endpoint, that's a good way of seeing the incremental improvements. You could create a dashboard where there's a mix of graphs and a bit of narrative. That's something that I use. It depends. That might not be relevant for your project. That might be a bit too much. But I think it really is worthwhile, and we're not always the best, certainly in museums, at showing off about our achievements, even at a smaller scale, and demonstrating. And to that point, benefits then of doing this, so the ability to communicate with a wide audience of your successes and challenges with more ease. You saw that press release at the start of the presentation, the first couple of slides. I was able to draw pretty quickly some details for my colleagues in the press team about what we'd been up to there, because I had them to hand. So it's good to have these to hand, even if it's just for a newsletter or just for your update weekly for your manager. It can demonstrate the benefits of documentation work generally through improvement. So you can show demonstrably how important it is to have volunteers working on something, or to have members of staff working on something, because you can show here's the before and here's the after, here's the impact of this work. You can also draw attention to the work. As I mentioned earlier, it is in exhibitions. It sometimes doesn't get the funding or the attention or the resources either. So you can gather support and input by again demonstrating what's achievable in the time. So just a note there, it's not necessarily how you document things, but it's really worthwhile doing. And like I say, we're not so great at it in museums sometimes, demonstrating what we've done. Here's a couple of examples of mine. So if you want to nosy and see where we're at, so you can see that so far what's on the database. I will caveat that with we've got lots of things documented on spreadsheets that haven't quite been uploaded yet, but we've increased our records to 679,000, so just short of 680,000. So that's a 30,000 odd increase so far straight on the database. And also you can see that nice orange line increasing on what our imaging levels are at as well. So that's since September last year. So it's a nice visual indicator of how we're doing. And also on the right hand side there, I mentioned the cash coins. So just drawing those out, a nice image of them to explain what we're looking at, because cash coins might not mean anything to lots of people looking at them. So you can communicate what it is that you're working with there as well. So I like to just draw those things out to, I suppose, humanize the process and explain what some of the achievements are. So just to summarize quickly on the documentation side of things, so understand what you have. Estimates are fine. There's a question in the chat, I think, about the audit, so I can come back to that later. But just a good idea, a sense of what you're working towards. I think there's a shelf worth of coins. It's about 100 of them. That kind of thing is good. And then you can sort of reflect at the end. Oh, well, it's actually 88, so it wasn't quite 100, or it was more. You can prioritize. You should also prioritize which information and which objects. So we've talked about the basic information, the reasoning for that, the spectrum standards as well, and then the added extras on top. So you can choose based on your knowledge base, on your resources, how much and how little, how many bells and whistles you'll add to your records. Utilize the help. I certainly do. So yeah, Google it, use the website, use Money and Medals Network, use the resources available to you. As I said at the start, I'm not a numismatist, but through these things, I have been able to develop skills in them. And Mike certainly has been adding to his as he's been working through this as well. Keep a note of what you learn. We haven't mentioned this, but we have got a mega document that we're compiling of all the different quirks that we find about the collection, all the different issues. If we find a whole series of things that have the measurement out by this much and we know about it, we add it to the document so that we sort of keep a note of all the things that we're learning. And should we all win the lottery, there is a record there of things that we knew, and so all this stuff that curators accrue in their brains, or people accrue the knowledge and then they leave or they retire, it's captured somewhere that we can draw on. Even if it's a bit of a mess, it's still useful. Make efficiencies. Skim the work where you can. Does your CMS allow batch uploading? So the spreadsheet's there. Can you find out? Can you talk to the person responsible for it if you don't have direct access for it? Can you copy records for similar objects across? I've worked with CMSs before where we can batch update information across several records at the same time. I can't do that anymore in mine, but it might be something you're able to do. So have a think about how you might replicate similar information across records. And like I say, you don't have to be an expert, so don't feel daunted. Just do the best that you can, especially if you're not an expert or a collector or a researcher and you are dealing at this from a collections perspective. Don't feel scared by the subject matter. Just do the best, and then you can always build from there. But the accountability for the object is one of the main things, certainly from a museum perspective. And Mike?
I was muted there. Yeah, so just the final bit on the photography is we live in an age where you walk around with a excellent camera in your pocket. You do not need anything super crazy, especially if you're doing it on a small scale. Taking a top-down image is best, and lighting is crucial and is your friend. Make sure you're doing as much top lighting as you can when trying to take a crisp, clean image of a coin. What I'll also say is make sure to go back through and kind of check out your images. Be aware of a sort of quality assurance process as well. If you can't tell what you're looking at when you're looking at a photo that you just took, chances are nobody else is going to be able to either, right? And that is the really important piece of object photography, right? This isn't something necessarily that's going in a beautiful exhibition book. This is to be able to determine, hey, this object looks different than this object, therefore we know it's this one versus that one, right? So you need to make sure you're getting all of those details on the coin, making sure, again, that you're doing a top-down image, that lighting is good, you're using a solid background. Again, I can't tell you how many emails we get to Coins ID where somebody has an off-focus image of a coin in the palm of their hand, and we can't help anybody with that, right? So again, just make sure you're taking the cleanest, crispest image possible, and even using just very basic equipment, you should be able to achieve that. With that, I believe we are at the end here of our presentation. I see that there's a lot of questions in the chat already, but I just wanted to go ahead and thank everybody for coming by today and learning a little bit about how we do things. And I hope that we could shed some light about how the British Museum is going through and dealing with all of their objects, as well as give you some insight about how you can adapt our approach for your collection at various different sizes. So I'll pass it to Miriam for any final words, but yeah, very happy to answer your questions.
Likewise, thanks, Mike. And yeah, happy to answer questions, share knowledge, and generally, share what we've learnt through this process.
Wow, thank you, Miriam and Mike, for such an engaging and insightful talk. It was really excellent. We have a lot of questions today. So, of course, the first one from Joe is, how did you do your audit to find out where the gaps were? Are you checking every object to see if it was on?
Yeah, it was kind of like a whole team exercise. I wasn't here at the time because it was done a little bit before I joined the BM. But my understanding is that it really was a matter of opening up every cabinet, drawing from MI Plus, our collections management system, what that cabinet should have in it, say 100 coins on the database, and then counting one by one how many there were. So there is margin for human error there, of course, and we trust that people didn't go I think, there's about this much in there. So we take the estimate with a pinch of salt, which is why I say an estimate is fine. But yeah, it is very time consuming. That was an effort that was undertaken by, like I say, the whole department at every level. People were contributing to that. So you might want to, just focus on a specific area. If that's something that you do feel that you need to do in your collections, you can always scale it down for just the particular area of interest, and give an idea. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, I'll just add that as a part of this documentation and digitization process as well, what a lot of departments are doing is their audit as they're going through and doing this. So we're in a unique position where there's a huge swath of our collection that is undocumented. Other departments aren't necessarily in that position. So what they're doing is they're pulling information directly from their records database and then going through and doing maybe a little more closely looking at, hey, is this weight correct? Is everything on the correct ticket? So on and so forth. I can't really speak to what other departments are doing, or even, if they have tickets or not. I've been dealing solely here in this department. But yeah, it's really a lot of, location updating and so on and so forth that falls into that sort of end of the audit procedure.
All right, thanks, guys. The next question from Manny is, where is the object number assigned from, and where in this process? I.e., do you have an identifier in the database that is different from the one assigned at accession?
So Miriam, since you're in control here, can you go back to the resources one that had the ticket on there? Excellent. So as you can see with the image with the red background here, so we have the coin on the right-hand side, and on the left-hand side, you will see the ticket. And you can see, even though it's a little grainy, there are a couple of numbers on there. So the general, and I will say general, way that registration numbers are built here at the British Museum is it's a date and then the object number that it was assigned on that date. So you can see 79 on the top. That means it was done in the year 1879, 9/8 on 9/8 of that year, and it was the first object done on that day. Now, that gets a little complicated because if somebody elsewhere in the museum was assigning an object number on that day, there could be two different registration numbers. And as I said, there has to be unique object numbers for everything in our collection. So that leaves us in a unique position of having both a registration number, which is assigned to, how it was originally acquired into our collection. But then you also have something called a PRN, which is like a personal record number, I believe. That's what we're sequencing when we're doing the object sequencing, so that we can make sure that when a photo gets assigned or gets uploaded, it's assigned to the correct record. These PRNs are created automatically when a new record is created on our digital database. So it's possible that something might have two of the same across different departments or even within departments registration numbers. That's why we have the PRNs that keeps things separated. It's a very complicated system, and I'll be honest, we spend a lot of time trying to trace down historic duplicates of registration numbers, and there's a whole process around that I will not bore you with, that I feel like gets updated and changed all the time because we keep learning things. But yeah, that's basically how we come to our registration numbers, and it's all through our archival material. But Miriam, if there's anything you wanted to add there.
No, I think that's a nice summary. So yeah, it's given at the point of accession, and like Mike mentioned, that PRN number, something akin to a barcode. We don't actually use barcoding as such, but it is a unique string of numbers for every object, just because of that lovely scenario we have here of having multiple departments that have sort of run independently for many years. So yeah.
Okay, our next question is from Craig. You are obviously documenting coins within your own collection that you have access to. Any tips for someone like me who is documenting coins that are on other museums' websites, auction platforms, and eBay, Facebook, etc., where I have variable quality images, information, and possible duplicates? This might be one I have to jump in on as well.
Yeah, I mean, Go
Sorry,
for it,
Mike.
please.
Oh,
No.
I think it depends what you're after in some ways, because very much in a museum context, it's security and accountability that's sort of forefront, and then it's the knowing what we have so we can use it for exhibitions and engagement and enhancing the collection, that kind of thing. So there are other reasons that we are cataloguing that aren't just knowing more about the objects. So I'd say for us, it very much matters to be doing it from the object itself. We don't tend to catalogue from just papers and lists that say we have things, because we haven't seen the thing itself. So we are object first cataloguing. So perhaps Mike or Campbell, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, the only sorry, Campbell,
yeah,
just to
Mike.
say really quickly, jumping on what Miriam was saying, is kind of know what it is you're looking for. Obviously, if there's some records that exist already are looking great and others are not so great. Try to find, what the kind of common denominator is of the most important, the sort of key fields that you're looking for. Like we were talking about with the collections trust standards there, have your own kind of standard put in place, and making sure you know that, I think, would be a crucial step as you're going around and trying to gather all that information. But yeah, I'll leave it to Campbell to end off here.
Yeah, I come from the research perspective of doing die studies. So I record coins all the time from other museums and auction sites. And I haven't recorded any from Facebook. But usually it's about keeping a very good record about where you've got it from. And you're going to run into duplicates all the time. Like I've been going through my catalog recently, and some of these coins, they pop up in auctions again and again and again. You'll see them sometimes 8 times, and then they end up in a museum as well, because we have a long collecting history. And it's important to just make sure that you record all of that information. Even if it has a separate entry, just make sure you've noted that it's a duplicate and refer it back to your original record. And you're only going to be able to realize if it is a duplicate by comparing the photographs. And you need to see the photographs. If you haven't seen the picture, if you haven't seen the actual item, you just can't make that judgment call. Weights, they can change depending on who's weighed the coin and how the scale has been set. Even measurements on the coin, we're talking about, measuring the diameter. Well, if you measure a different part of the diameter on an ancient coin, for example, that will change as well. So it's just about keeping a good record and, I guess a bit of grunt work going through it all and checking through. Okay, so we have another question, and this is about the automated process in Photoshop. Is it a commercial tool? And do you have any advice for automatically cutting out medals and ribbons?
Okay, so it is not a commercial tool. What we do is straight through Photoshop, and I'm trying to see, somebody had already kind of explained it as a batch action. Yes, slam dunk, whoever that is. Thank you for that advice there. Yes, you can just sit and basically record your actions in Photoshop. So you do it all once manually, and it records all of that, and then it'll do it over and over and over and over for you automatically. That's the way that we have done it, and we found that given the scale of things that we're doing, it works well most of the time. Then we go through, and our imagers kind of go through all of the images that they've taken after the processing, and they go through and they touch up things as needed. Maybe it didn't capture the whole part of a coin, or maybe it cut out too much. That's something that they go through and fix manually. What I'll say for things like ribbons, orders, and stuff like that, this is a problem that we run into all of the time. If you go back to that imaging slide, Miriam. Yeah, I mean, as you can, the previous one there. Yeah, as you can see, we're dealing with some religious medals that have made their way onto some sort of rosary in that far right image. That's something that the automatic Photoshop procedure is going to have a really hard time finding and cutting out, right? There's certain ways that you can play around with it. We have found, though, that we kind of have to manually go through and deal with those objects. We're very fortunate that the bulk of our collection is not that way. But yeah, generally I have found those kind of just have to be done manually. I'll also say that there's two ways that it goes about automatically selecting the material when you do that, like an automated selection tool. I have found that if you use the cloud-based selection instead of the localized based collection tool there, or it tends to work better in grabbing all of the parts of the coin that you need and cutting out the bits that you don't. I don't know why that is. It's just something that I found on Photoshop, that if you're using the cloud-based, it tends to work better.
Perhaps it's a little bit of AI helping it along. I've had a similar experience to Mike. I photographed a coin hoard. I had to record all the batch actions, and then I just had to manually go through and fix anything that had been cut out incorrectly. Something that can help is if you elevate the object, perhaps you just pop it on a plastic box on top of that white or off-white surface, and then if you have a side light, that offsets the shadow and makes the automatic selection process easier. But yeah, sometimes it just struggles and you just have to fix it yourself.
Yeah, this is useful because it works in 85 to 90% of things, which is great because we've got a huge amount of volume that we have to get through. So that leaves us with, we can spend some time making sure that all of the nitty-gritty ones actually get taken care of.
Okay, we have a question from Chris who asks, how do you intend to photograph banknotes with Urian, etc. at scale? Question mark.
Yes, so this is a problem that we've run into a little bit, which I think, and please correct me if I'm wrong here. So this is basically the new guidelines are they don't like you taking photos or scans of modern banknotes and putting them online for counterfeiting purposes. Obviously, you can understand why there's regulation surrounding that. We have found, luckily, fingers are crossed, thus far it hasn't been a huge problem, with in part because we're dealing with such a massive historical collection. So it's not something that's really being flagged so far as we can tell from anything prior to about 1950 is what I've noticed. And even then there are some things that get through. When we've come across it individually, it's mostly a problem when we're dealing with the automated Photoshop processing, I'll be honest. And in those instances, we can generally get around it just by manually editing. It hasn't been a huge problem thus far, luckily. But I also have to say that I haven't been on the imaging side in a couple of months. And I know there's now been a big push to start scanning things again. So I guess we'll see if there continue to be more problems moving forward. But thus far, we've been fortunate because it's such a historical collection. It hasn't been a huge problem.
This actually ties into another question from Nick saying, do you watermark any images of modern banknotes to stop potential counterfeiting? And also Jennifer from the Bank of England Museum also said scanning their banknotes is also an issue for them. So you're not alone.
Yeah, we don't put any watermarks on there, though that question makes me think about if we should. But not that I am aware of, because we're just putting it up there for the collections online. That actually might be something to talk through with our photography team, and maybe the collections online team as well. But yeah, that's not something that we do. But yeah, it is becoming more of a problem. But I'm sure they will, as we start scanning some more banknotes here, I'm sure we will try to identify a solution.
All right, thank you, Mike. I don't think you can answer the question about the coins of the Roman Empire and the BM as an update to the physical book. So we'll move past that one. Have you used AI in any aspect of your process?
I can answer that one. Oh, sorry.
I was going to say the AI, surely the cloud cutting out on Photoshop might be a little bit of AI.
Yes. So we aren't. There are two ways of looking at this question, I suppose. There's lots of interest in the use of AI for cataloguing in museums recently. There is a project that the British Museum's been part of called Sloan Lab, that was part of Towards National Collection, which explored the use of AI across several national institutions for aspects of cataloguing, interlinking archival resources into cataloguing, that kind of thing. So if you're interested in the use of AI in museums, I'd recommend Towards National Collection as a project to look at. However, in our processes, I mean, yes, the Photoshop aspect, a lot of it's integrated into daily life now. So Google reverse image search is enhanced by AI. We also may use it sometimes for transliterating or translating quite complex inscriptions if we don't understand them. Mainly in modern languages, in modern collections where we aren't able to turn to a colleague who speaks German or French and check with them. So we use it in touches in a way that any person might use it in their research, I'd say. Whether we're using things like character recognition and things like that, no, we're not. And that's because from the research I've been looking at, it's not very reliable when you can't feed it a lot of the same handwriting. So Sloan Lab, for example, had Hans Sloane, the founder of the British Museum's letters, and I think fed those through an AI machine. I don't know the details of it specifically, but had a lot of material for it to learn from. We don't have that from Mr. Jones, who was cataloguing in 1877. We haven't got enough of his handwriting to be able to say, oh, that's his sevens. So we can read the tickets, those little circular discs of paper with the coins more efficiently, I don't think, than a doc's assistant. So it's something that is interesting to look at. I know that other museums are potentially looking at it as well and looking at using it on the coins directly too. We don't have necessarily the need to, given that we have staff members to do that work for us. But it is, in touches being added to our work. I think it would be something interesting to do as a research project. But sadly, with the 2029 deadline and an awful lot of coins to do, it's not something I foresee being able to do necessarily as part of the project.
Okay, thank you, Miriam. There's one final question, which is from Philippe, and it is, for the imaging, particularly banknotes that are colourful, have you considered using a photographic reference scale? And they've included a picture to have a reference that the image captured is not overly processed by the camera, sensor, lighting, or processing software as Photoshop.
Could you go to the next slide for me, Miriam? I'm trying to recall. It looks like we don't have, so we use like a grayscale for our, when we're doing the cameras. That's not necessarily included in the image, but it makes sure that everything is producing it at basically the same color and light level. We don't necessarily do that, I believe, for the scanning, though this is something I think we should probably consider, especially as we're kind of doing a new jump with some more scanning coming up here in the future, and definitely something that I'll bring up with our photography lead.
Awesome. Okay, so with that, thank you again, Miriam and Mike, for the fantastic presentation and for your time. And thank you to everyone who has joined us today. It's been wonderful to have you all with us. I'll be sending out an email survey shortly, and I'd really appreciate it if you could take a few minutes to fill it out. Feedback's not only valuable to Miriam and Mike, because I'll pass it on to them, but it also helps us shape and plan next year's talks. Our next talk will be on the 26th of November with Dr. Claire Rowan on engaging school groups with numismatic collections. So do keep an eye out on MMN Communications for details about our next event. If you're not on the mailing list, you can sign up at our website, mmn.org.nz. MMN. Oh God, it's www.warwick.ac.uk/MMN. We'd love to see you there. So thank you again, everyone, for coming. I hope to see you next time.